Former Hells Angels Sergeant-at-Arms Dayne Brajkovich has resurfaced in Perth courtrooms, and once again, he made sure all media cameras were on him. The infamous enforcer, known for his full-body tattoos and icy stare, walked out of the Perth Magistrates' Court dressed in black from head to toe.
He was the face of rebellion covered in ink, eyes burning with pride, and the Hells Angels patch stitched into his very identity. Then, just as suddenly as he rose, Dayne Brajkovich vanished from the spotlight, shunned by the brotherhood he once ruled with fear and loyalty. Now, he's back, but not as the angel the world remembers. He's wearing a new patch, a Mongol's colors. What could drive a man to betray his past for his rivals?
Dayne Brajkovich has become one of the most instantly recognizable outlaws in Australia. Covered head to toe in tattoos, he rose to prominence as the Hells Angels' most feared enforcer.
The boy from Belmont. The story of Dayne Brajkovich doesn't begin in blood or bikes, it starts in the hum of suburbia. Late 1970 seconds, Perth was a dry heat sprawl of fibro homes, backyard hoses, and boys who learned to ride before they could drive. In 1979, one of those boys came squalling into the world, Dayne Brajkovich, born to a working-class family in the city's east. The region around Belmont and Redcliffe wasn't wealthy, but it was loyal, the kind of place where everyone knew your dad's trade and your mum's car. He grew up close to the airport, under the endless roar of departing jets, in a landscape of wide roads and mechanic yards. Belmont's culture in the 80 seconds and 90 seconds was blue-collar grit. Men clocking off from factories, teenagers racing dirt bikes on empty lots, and a social code that valued toughness more than talk. For kids like Dayne, toughness was the currency of survival. Old schoolmates have said that nothing about him back then screamed outlaw. He was quiet, intense, sometimes restless, the kind of teenager who'd rather be in the shed tuning an engine than at a party. But Perth in those years was already feeling the rumble of a different undercurrent. The Hells Angels, Coffin Cheaters, and Mongols' names were whispered in pubs and service stations, carried on the same wind that smelled of petrol and rebellion. For a working-class boy obsessed with speed, danger, and respect, the biker image had gravity. By his late teens, the first hints of that gravity began to pull. Photos from around age 18 show a clean-cut kid, no ink, short hair, just another face from the suburbs. The man he would become is unrecognizable in those shots. Somewhere between that ordinary youth and the hardened figure the world would later know, something flipped. The tattoos came next, first the sleeves, then the chest, then his face. Each piece of ink told a story, a postcode, a creed, a life mapped in permanent ink. In Perth, the lines between bike enthusiasts and outlaw clubs were always thin. Workshops doubled as hangouts, and weekend rides turned into recruitment drives. It wasn't just about crime, it was about belonging. The Hells Angels offered hierarchy, brotherhood, and purpose. They were kings of rebellion. For someone like Dayne, who prized loyalty and power, that world didn't just call it demanded. He started hanging around older bikers, men who spoke in code and carried themselves like soldiers of their own nation. They weren't the kind of people you met by accident. Every encounter was a test, every ride a chance to prove you could keep up. In those early years, Dayne learned the first rule of the life he would later live. Respect is earned by violence, loyalty, and silence. That lesson would carry him from the quiet streets of Belmont into a world where friendship came with blood debts and mistakes could end in gunfire. The boy from 6104 had found his direction. The next step was to earn his patch, and the world would soon learn his name. Schooling, youth trouble, and the path toward outlaw life. Hey, investigator family, today we're inviting you to join our inner circle, to become more than just a viewer, to become part of our biker community. For years, we've brought you the cases others won't touch. Now it's time to take that connection to the next level. Introducing our channel membership program. For just $10 a month, join the investigator family. 3 videos every single week. You watch our videos before anyone else. Exclusive early access to all videos. Days before YouTube, 100% ad-free viewing experience. And there are videos that only you can watch. But that's just where it begins. For our most dedicated members, $50 a month, you'll join our private Discord, Group A community of biker enthusiasts just like you. discussing theories, evidence, and perspectives you won't find anywhere else, and the chance to be featured as our Member of the Month. In a world of sensationalized headlines and surface-level coverage, we've always dug deeper, and now you can go even deeper with us. Join our membership community today. The truth is waiting. By the early 1992s, Perth was a city divided between sunshine and tension. The suburbs sprawled outward, the economy throbbed on mining money, and kids grew up idolizing both footy heroes and outlaws. For a teenager like Dayne Brajkovich, the traditional routes, trade school, apprenticeship, steady job, felt more like cages than lifelines. He had a head for mechanics and a taste for risk. Engines calmed him. Authority did not. At school, he wasn't the class clown or the teacher's pet. He was the one who stared too long, who didn't flinch when challenged. Teachers in Belmont state schools remember those kinds of boys. Clever in their own way, impulsive, quick to bristle at disrespect. Discipline systems in the 90s still leaned on suspension and detention. Neither worked on Dayne. He wasn't interested in conforming. He was interested in control. Outside the classroom, Perth's bike culture was already seeping into the streets. Harley-Davidsons thundered through the city like moving warnings, and outlaw motorcycle clubs had started staking territory. The Coffin Cheetahs, Gypsy Jokers, and Hell's Angels were all visible presences. Kids who worked in auto shops or panel beaters saw patched members up close. Boots dusty from the road, rings clanking on beer bottles, money flowing faster than wages. Some joined for belonging, others for fear of being on the wrong side of them. Dayne's teenage years coincided with a wave of bikie violence that rippled across Western Australia. In 1998, shootouts between rival clubs made front-page news. By 2001, the state's organized crime unit had a permanent task force targeting motorcycle gangs. Each police press conference only elevated the outlaw mystique. For impressionable youths, notoriety became another form of fame. Friends from those early days have said, Dayne always had a gift for intimidation, not empty aggression, but the calm kind that makes others step aside. When most boys were still figuring out girlfriends or careers, he'd already begun cultivating an identity built on dominance. Tattoos became part of that armor. The first ones were small, barely visible, but the effect was addictive. Ink bled into skin, and with each new design, he built a reputation. Tattoos were declarations of postcode loyalty, of defiance, of belonging to something greater than oneself. By his early 20s, he drifted toward the workshops and garages where bikers gathered. Mechanics who knew him said he had talent with Harleys. He could strip one to its bolts and rebuild it better than before. In that subculture, skill was currency. It wasn't long before older men took notice. They called him young blood, strong, smart, and fearless. That's the profile clubs crave. Around the same time, Perth's Hell's Angels chapter was rebuilding. Police crackdowns had scattered members, but the core endured. They needed new energy men who could handle themselves, who'd bleed for the patch. Dayne fit the mold perfectly. He started as a hang-around, washing bikes, guarding doors, proving loyalty through action. Those early nights in smoky garages and open road rides forged the foundation of his life's next phase. Belmont's quiet kid was gone. In his place stood a man already halfway to legend, a recruit stepping into one of the most feared brotherhoods on Earth. Joining the Hell's Angels, earning the patch and building fear.
Dayne Brajkovich has become one of the most instantly recognizable outlaws in Australia. Covered head to toe in tattoos, he rose to prominence as the Hell's Angels' most feared enforcer before becoming a household name splashed across newspapers and nightly news bulletins.
Every outlaw club has its rites, its rituals of pain, loyalty, and patience. For Dayne Brajkovich, earning the Hell's Angels patch wasn't an accident of luck. It was a calculated evolution. By the late 2000s, he had already been hanging around the Perth chapter for years, running errands, fixing bikes, being the silent muscle when tensions flared. Those who knew him said he had the patience of a man who understood that real power doesn't come fast. It's built one act of violence and obedience at a time. In the Hell's Angels, the journey from hang-around to prospect is both a test and a trap. You prove your loyalty through service not to one man, but to the club as a living thing. Every member becomes a judge of your worth, every mistake a mark against you. Prospects sleep light, knowing they're being watched even when no one speaks. For Dayne, that scrutiny became motivation. He didn't just want the Yukon patch, he wanted to embody it. The Perth scene during those years was simmering. Police raids were frequent, rival clubs like the Mongols and Coffin Cheaters were expanding, and each gang wanted dominance over Western Australia's lucrative drug and extortion markets. The Angels, one of the most globally feared motorcycle clubs, were determined to remain the apex predator. Dayne's physical presence made him a natural enforcer, tall, muscled, and covered in evolving layers of ink that told the story of his transformation. His tattoos became his calling card. By then, his face bore the Angels' insignia, a move that even within outlaw circles was considered extreme. But that was Dayne's language. Commitment written in blood and ink. Once he bore the Hells Angels logo on his face, there was no going back. It was the ultimate declaration of loyalty, a permanent rejection of any normal life. Every glance in the mirror was a reminder of who he was, and who he could never be. Again, those inside the club recall his intensity. When tensions flared with rival groups, Dayne wasn't one to stand back. He carried himself like a man who believed he couldn't be hurt, fearless, in the face of knives, guns, or police. And Perth, by then, was cracking under bikie wars that turned public streets into battlegrounds. From Northbridge pubs to industrial yards in Ascot, Angels and Coffin Cheaters were clashing in violent bursts that left police scrambling to contain them. The media painted them as barbarians on bikes. The clubs wore that reputation like armor. By 2013, Dayne had earned full membership, and with it came authority. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a name. His reputation grew beyond the clubhouses. To the police, he was a face on a list of targets. To rivals, he was a symbol of the Angels' uncompromising loyalty. To younger bikers, he was what they wanted to be. Untouchable. That power came with enemies. But for a man like Dayne, that was the point. Fear wasn't a side effect, it was the goal. The Perth underworld had just gained one of its most recognizable figures, and soon everyone would learn how much chaos that recognition could bring. Rising through the ranks, the enforcer and the code, by the mid-2010 seconds, Dayne Brajkovich was no longer just a member of the Hells Angels. He was part of the club's muscle, the visible edge of its power. Perth's underworld was in flux, and every outlaw club needed men who could hold the line, deliver messages, and make examples. Dayne fit that mold with brutal precision. Tall, tattooed from scalp to ankle, he carried the Hells Angels creed not only on his back, but under his skin. His face was a billboard for allegiance, a warning to anyone who dared cross him or the club. Being an enforcer wasn't a job, it was a code. Outlaw clubs operate on fear and respect, twin pillars that keep brothers loyal and outsiders cautious. Within the Angels, an enforcer is part diplomat, part soldier, and part executioner. They mediate disputes within the chapter, collect debts, and handle business when subtlety fails. Every club has a few men willing to go that far. Dayne was one of them. He didn't drink much, didn't joke around, and rarely smiled. To most, he was intimidating even when silent. That aura earned him a particular kind of respect, the kind forged in violence. Western Australia's outlaw landscape was shifting fast. The Coffin Cheaters still held ground, the Gypsy Jokers were resurging, and whispers of the Mongols' expansion had police uneasy. The state's organized crime squad ramped up operations, raiding clubhouses and seizing bikes. Each crackdown only pushed clubs to tighten their codes. Inside the Angels, loyalty became everything. Betrayal wasn't forgiven, it was punished. Members lived by unwritten rules that demanded absolute commitment to the patch, to the president, to each other. Dayne thrived in that environment. To outsiders, he was a thug. To the club, he was dependable. He took hits, faced down police, and walked into situations that most men would sprint from. He didn't just carry the club's authority, he embodied it. Even rival bikers acknowledged that when Dayne showed up, things got serious. The Perth scene was also changing socially. Cameras were everywhere, and police surveillance made every movement a risk. But that didn't stop him. Whether in public clashes, bar confrontations, or courtrooms, he represented the old-school outlaw, spirit defiant, visible and proud. His tattooed face appeared in newspapers and on television screens, and soon his name became shorthand for intimidation in WA's criminal underbelly. Behind the violence was a man who understood hierarchy. He followed the chain of command, respected senior members, and lived by the code of silence, omerta, the unspoken rule of never talking to police. The Angels rewarded loyalty above all else, and Dayne's reputation for unflinching obedience earned him influence. Inside the clubhouse, men listened when he spoke. Outside, his stare alone ended arguments, but every rise carries a cost. The higher Dayne climbed, the thinner the air became. Rival clubs were watching him, the police were building cases, and the media began portraying him as the face of WA's outlaw problem. That spotlight, once a symbol of power, would soon become a target. The enforcer had reached the peak of his status, but the cracks were already forming beneath the surface. Next came the downfall, and with it, a collision of pride, power, and betrayal that would shake the Angels from the inside. Public battles, media, police, and the biker wars. By the late 2010 seconds, Perth had a new face for the outlaw scene, Dayne Brajkovich. His tattooed visage had become a media fixation, splashed across nightly news segments and front-page spreads. Every court appearance, every brawl, every whispered rumor, all of a bikie feud had his name attached. For the Hells Angels, visibility could be power, but too much of it attracted heat. For Dayne, that line blurred completely. He was too recognizable to blend in, too notorious to ignore. Police had long waged war on Western Australia's outlaw motorcycle clubs, but by this point, their campaign had intensified. New anti-consorting laws were passed, giving officers power to stop, search, and charge bikies for merely gathering in public. Clubhouses were raided, assets seized, and social media accounts monitored. Yet, amid the crackdown, the clubs refused to vanish. The Angels, still one of the most disciplined syndicates, used loyalty and intimidation to maintain order. And Dayne, ever defiant, refused to bow to the system. He became a symbol of resistance. When police banned club colors in public, he continued to wear his Angels insignia. When media painted bikies as criminal networks, he posted proudly on social media, an act that was both provocation and statement. His entire identity was wrapped in that patch. Tattoos across his face and head proclaimed allegiance so loudly that no law could silence it. But the attention was double-edged. Every headline that celebrated his rebellion also deepened police scrutiny. The bikie wars during those years were brutal. Western Australia's underworld was shifting. The Mongols, expanding aggressively across Australia, were encroaching on traditional Angels territory. Clubs that had coexisted under an uneasy truce began colliding again over turf, business, and pride. Street brawls, drive-by shootings, and retaliatory assaults once again made Perth feel like a powder keg. Brajkovich, as one of the Angels' most visible members, was drawn into every confrontation, whether or not he threw the first punch. In one infamous clash, a public fight outside a Perth nightclub in 2021, captured on CCTV and widely broadcast, showed Dayne brawling with Nick Martin, a high-ranking Rebels figure. The footage, raw and violent, spread across Australia within hours. It was outlaw life in real time, and it cemented his reputation as both fighter and symbol. But that brawl also set off a chain reaction that would change everything. Not long after, Nick Martin was shot dead at the Kwinana Motorplex, a murder that shocked the entire nation. Though Dayne was never charged in relation to the killing, the shooting triggered one of the largest gang crackdowns in Western Australia's history. Police raided homes, questioned bikers, and tightened restrictions. The message was clear. The old days of unchecked outlaw life were over. For Dayne Brajkovich, that period marked the turning point. The media painted him as a villain, but in the clubhouse, he was still respected, still an angel, still loyal. Or at least, that's how it seemed. Because even as he stood firm under the Angels' banner, fault lines were forming inside the club and inside himself. Pride was becoming poison, and soon those cracks would burst wide open. The downfall, internal conflict and expulsion from the Angels. Every empire collapses from within before enemies can touch it. For Dayne Brajkovich, that truth came not from police raids or rival clubs, but from the brotherhood he once lived and bled for. The Hells Angels had rules, sacred and ancient to their kind. Loyalty was law. Pride was tolerated until it threatened the club itself. And Dayne's pride, the same fire that built his reputation, would become the spark that set everything ablaze. By 2021, he was one of the most recognizable Angels in Australia. His tattooed face, lined with the club's emblem, wasn't just commitment, it was a proclamation. But the visibility that made him a symbol of strength also made him a liability. For a club that thrived in shadows, Dayne's rising fame, fueled by viral videos, police photos, and endless headlines, became too bright a spotlight. In the outlaw world, fame is dangerous. It draws heat, police, and attention that can unravel decades of quiet power. Inside the Perth chapter, whispers began to circulate. Some members saw him as too brash, too loud, too visible. Others admired his loyalty, but worried his media presence was painting targets on their backs. For years, Dayne had been the muscle, the face of defiance, but the internal politics of the Angels are ruthless. Leadership isn't based on popularity, it's based on control. The more his personal legend grew, the less controllable he became. Tensions reportedly began to flare. Perth's club dynamics were shifting as veteran members sought to cool things down amid heightened police pressure. The Angels had always demanded discipline and silence, qualities that conflict with being a media spectacle. And for Dayne, staying quiet wasn't an option. He embodied the old-school outlaw spirit, open, unapologetic, confrontational. Another time, that defiance would have been rewarded. In the modern era of surveillance and legal warfare, it was suicide. By early 2022, the rumors became fact. Dayne Brajkovich was expelled from the Hells Angels. The decision stunned both the public and the underworld. For someone who had worn the club's logo on his face, a mark of eternal loyalty, the expulsion was more than rejection. It was erasure. In outlaw culture, being kicked out bad isn't just social exile, it's symbolic death. Your brothers turn their backs, your colors are stripped, your tattoos, once sacred, become reminders of a family that no longer claims you. When reporters caught up with him outside court later that year, he didn't flinch. He spoke about the expulsion with the same stoic confidence he'd always carried, refusing to show bitterness. But those who knew the life understood what it meant. Losing your patch is like losing your skin. It's the end of everything you've built, the hierarchy, the respect, the identity. Yet in the silence that followed, something unexpected happened. Instead of disappearing, Dayne stayed visible. He posted, he spoke. He walked through Perth with the same tattoos, the same swagger. No patch, but no fear either. For a man defined by allegiance, he seemed strangely free. And then came the twist no one saw coming. The man who once lived as the Angels' fiercest loyalist was about to cross the line no outlaw ever dares to, by switching sides. Crossing the line, from Angel to Mongol, when a man who has worn a war patch and ridden with one of the world's most infamous outlaw clubs shows up in garb, suggesting a rival chapter, the world takes notice. For Dayne Brajkovich, the moment of shift came not in announced defection, but in the small details. A t-shirt, a tattoo glance, a court appearance where choices spoke louder than words. According to media reporting, Brajkovich appeared in court wearing clothing and insignia that local journalists interpreted as signaling membership of the Mongols motorcycle club, the bitter rivals of the Hells Angels motorcycle club. In October 2025, an article in the West Australian reported that Brajkovich, formerly a prominent Hells Angel member, was facing court over drugs and weapons charges in garb suggesting Mongols membership. Earlier, another piece described how he turned up in court with a t-shirt emblazoned with raiders and other subtle signals that he might have made the switch. Why does this matter? The Mongols and Hells Angels are not friendly. Their rivalry is patched in decades of animosity, both global and local. In Western Australia, seeing someone shift from one side to another is more than a wardrobe change. Brajkovich's appearance suggested that after years as a Hells Angel enforcer, he might be aligning with a new tribe. Public statements are thin. The facts lie in his public profile. One media outlet even called him ex-Hells Angel bikie turned Mongol in the headline. For For Brajkovich, the change seems to have been gradual. After his expulsion from the Hells Angels, he didn't vanish. He remained in the public eye. He showed up for court, tattoos visible, demeanor steady. In one case, when facing a challenge under anti-insignia laws, he was cleared the first in WA to successfully challenge those laws. That victory may have underscored his unwillingness to be hidden, his readiness to remain visible regardless of which patch he wore. The moment that brought the issue into sharper focus was the swastika tattoo charge. Brajkovich was charged with displaying a Nazi symbol on his chin. The police commissioner remarked he was a middle-aged man playing dress-ups. While not directly about the Mongols' transition, the incident underscored how his image management and choice of public symbols were under intense scrutiny. In outlaw culture, wearing a patch of a rival is not casual. It is often seen as betrayal or declaration, and it invites reaction. As one legal reporter noted, his clothing that morning may have been the signal. Brajkovich's shift from Hells Angels colors to Mongols signals that the chapter after expulsion wasn't fade out, it was transformation. For law enforcement, it's a red flag. A high-profile figure flipping allegiances can trigger realignment, violence, retribution. For Brajkovich, it means new alliances or new enemies. He has known the Angels' code. Now he is publicly hinting at another's. The game has changed. The man who once bled for one patch now walks under another's shadow, or so the public story suggests. The next chapter is already writing itself. Whether realignment inside the underworld, courtroom battles, or street violence, the transformation is done. Whether it's refuge, revenge, or reinvention remains to be recorded in plain fact. Symbols and skin, tattoos, identity, and public meaning. In the outlaw world, identity isn't spoken, it's worn. Few embody that truth more literally than Dayne Brajkovich. His skin is a battlefield of ink, every square centimeter carrying defiance, history, or allegiance. The tattoos that crawl across his face, skull, neck, and torso are a visual biography of transformation from suburban boy to soldier of the Hells Angels. And now, the man whose appearance alone can fill a courtroom gallery. In early interviews and photographs, before he became a national headline, the tattoos began as classic outlaw symbols, iron crosses, skulls, and references to the Angels. Over the years, they multiplied and darkened, eventually covering nearly all visible skin. Reporters covering his cases often noted that he is perhaps the most tattooed man to ever walk into a WA courtroom. When he steps through security, the atmosphere changes. Judges, journalists, and officers read his body before he ever speaks. The tattoos aren't random. They follow a code. In outlaw motorcycle culture, ink serves as certification, a resume you can't fake. Each piece can mark a club, a deed, a prison stint, or an earned honor. Brajkovich's most controversial mark was the swastika on his chin, a design that led to criminal charges in 2023 under Western Australia's new laws banning Nazi imagery in public. He denied wrongdoing, arguing the symbol had long predated the new legislation. The court case made headlines not only because of the symbol, but because it reignited debate about expression, outlaw culture, and the tension between personal history and legal reform. To police, such tattoos are evidence of allegiance. To sociologists, they're statements of rebellion. When he walks into public buildings, the ink becomes political. In one hearing, the judge commented that it was impossible to ignore the imagery. Yet for Dayne, the tattoos have always been armor reminders of loyalty once sworn, and battles survived. Even after his expulsion from the Hells Angels, he hasn't tried to hide or remove them. That refusal has become its own kind of message, a rejection of erasure. Tattoo artists in Perth's underground scene often describe men like Brajkovich as wearing their record. Outlaws don't use CVs, they use skin. The hierarchy of ink determines how you're greeted in a bar, whether you're respected or feared. A patch tattoo across the back means you earned it. A face tattoo means you'll never belong anywhere else. When Brajkovich showed up to court still wearing every emblem, he was making a statement that no law or expulsion could strip away who he is. But symbols evolve. After hints of a Mongols connection appeared, observers began reading his new imagery differently. Was it replacement or rebellion? Journalists pointed out subtler additions, new motifs, altered lettering, suggesting a slow morphing of identity. Whatever the interpretation, one fact remains. Dayne Brajkovich's body tells the entire story without a single spoken word. His tattoos are both confession and curse, a living archive of loyalty and loss. In a world where men change clubs but not convictions, his skin remains the one constant. Whether angel or Mongol, outlaw or individual, the message across his face still reads the same: unapologetic, untamed, unbowed. The law tightens, courtrooms, legislation, and the fight for visibility. By 2021, Western Australia wasn't just policing bikies, it was legislating them out of existence. The Criminal Organisations Control Act and subsequent reforms were designed to do what raids and prison time couldn't: erase outlaw visibility from public life. Colours, patches, and tattoos, the lifeblood of bikie identity, were declared illegal to display. It wasn't just about crime anymore, it was about symbolism, and no one embodied that better or more defiantly than Dayne Brajkovich. When the new laws came into effect, he was the first to test them, not through violence, but through visibility. His tattooed face had long been a lightning rod for the media, and now it became a legal target. Police didn't have to catch him in a crime, all they had to do was see him. The ink itself became grounds for prosecution. The outlaw era had collided head-on with a government that understood image warfare. The 2023 case against him, sparked by the public display of outlaw-related tattoos, was about more than one man's ink. It was a test case, a symbolic showdown between freedom of expression and public order. Supporters saw him as a scapegoat, an easy face for the state's moral crusade. Critics argued that his imagery, particularly the swastika tattoo, represented hate and intimidation. Between those extremes stood Brajkovich, unrepentant, unremoved, and unwilling to cover up. When he appeared in court, the cameras didn't need captions. Every headline was his face. Journalists wrote about the man who refuses to hide, as though the act of showing his skin had become a protest in itself. The magistrate's courtroom was packed, not with supporters or enemies, but with spectators, people curious to see what rebellion looked like when the rebellion wasn't about guns, but about skin. Outside the legal drama, Western Australia was in the middle of a full-scale anti-bikie operation. Police launched Operation Ironfish, a sweeping crackdown that dismantled clubhouses, confiscated weapons, and banned association between patched members in public. The new laws allowed officers to stop and question suspected bikies on sight. And in Perth, everyone knew Brajkovich was on that list. His movements, friends, even his social media posts became state interest. Every outing was surveillance bait. Yet even under the weight of constant scrutiny, he didn't retreat. When asked about the laws, he spoke with the same unfiltered conviction that had once made him infamous. "I've always lived by my own code." For some, that sounded like arrogance. For others, resilience. But behind the scenes, the pressure was relentless. His very appearance had become criminalized, his body politicized. The law wasn't chasing him anymore, it was watching him, waiting for him to exist in public. Western Australia's outlaw scene was changing fast. Many clubs went underground, trading leather for low profiles. But Dayne? He stayed above ground. His defiance wasn't in violence or revenge, it was in presence. Every public walk, every court appearance, every photograph was an act of rebellion against a system designed to erase him. In the new Australia, where bikie visibility meant prison time, Dayne Brajkovich stood as the last visible outlaw, the man who refused to vanish even when the law demanded it. Media, myth, and the making of a modern outlaw. Some outlaws build empires, others become legends. Dayne Brajkovich didn't have to try, the media did that for him. In an age where visibility is everything, his face, marked and defiant, became an icon of rebellion in Western Australia. Every time he walked out of court, cameras clicked like gunfire. Every tattoo, every stare, every silent smirk was broadcast nationwide. The press turned him from a man into a myth, from a club member into a symbol of resistance against conformity. By the early 2022s, Brajkovich's name was synonymous with WA's outlaw culture. Headlines didn't just report his charges, they dissected his appearance, his body language, his defiance. News outlets described him as Australia's most tattooed bikie, a title that blurred the line between curiosity and condemnation. He became a convenient face for every conversation about the state's anti-bikie laws, and he knew it. The more the media framed him as a villain, the more public fascination grew. The camera has always had a strange relationship with outlaws. It both glorifies and destroys them. For Brajkovich, that paradox became his reality. When he appeared on the evening news, viewers didn't just see a criminal defendant, they saw a relic of an old world. Leather, brotherhood, rebellion, loyalty, and danger. He looked like the past, refusing to die, and in that defiance, many found an uncomfortable kind of admiration. Sociologists often talk about folk devils, people who embody society's fears and become cultural lightning rods. Dayne fit the mold perfectly. To law enforcement, he was proof of criminal persistence. To politicians, a poster boy for why anti-bikie laws were needed. To the public, he was a mix of fascination and fear. And yet, despite the narrative spun around him, he never seemed to perform for the cameras. He didn't shout, posture, or beg for attention. He just existed visibly, unashamedly, and let everyone else do the storytelling. His expulsion from the Hells Angels followed by the rumors of Mongols' affiliation, only fueled the spectacle. The press framed it like a movie. Ex-Angel turns Mongol. Comment sections lit up. Some called him a traitor, others called him a survivor. But the truth was more complex. He had become a product of his environment and his image. The man and the myth had fused into one. He was no longer just Dayne Brajkovich. He was the outlaw everyone knows, but no one really knows. The media's fixation also had side effects. Every time his name appeared, police scrutiny followed. His life became a public performance he didn't choose. Every outing, every photograph, every rumor became part of the script. He spoke rarely, moved deliberately, and carried himself like someone who knew the price of fame, but refused to pay it with silence. In a digital world, where algorithms decide what rebellion looks like, Dayne Brajkovich became the outlaw that couldn't be cancelled. He wasn't online, seeking attention. Attention found him. And in doing so, the media accidentally created what it feared most: a modern myth in leather and ink, standing defiantly against a system obsessed with erasing him. The New Brotherhood, joining the Mongols and rewriting allegiance. To most of the world, switching clubs might sound like changing teams, but in the outlaw motorcycle world, it's closer to treason. The colors on your back are your flag, your religion, your blood oath. To cross from one empire to another, especially from the Hells Angels to the Mongols, is unthinkable. Yet that's exactly what Dayne Brajkovich did. And the shockwaves rippled across the entire Australian underworld. When rumors first surfaced in 2023 that Brajkovich had aligned with the Mongols, few believed it. He was the angel, the tattooed face of their Western Australian chapter. His loyalty was supposed to be eternal, etched across his skin in ink that could never fade. But as more sightings surfaced, Dayne standing beside patched Mongols, attending runs, meeting figures from their ranks, the impossible began to look real. And when images of him in the Mongols' orbit reached the media, the story exploded. Ex-Hells Angel joins Mongols. To understand how monumental that move was, you have to understand the history between those clubs. The Hells Angels and the Mongols have been locked in a decades-long rivalry, one stretching from the streets of Los Angeles to the highways of Australia. The Angels saw themselves as the elite, disciplined, selective, old world. The Mongols, meanwhile, were the rebellious upstarts, born out of rejection, chaos, and raw defiance. When these two forces clashed, it wasn't just about territory, it was about ideology. So when Dayne switched sides, it wasn't a quiet act of desperation. It was symbolic war. To his old brothers, it was betrayal. To the Mongols, it was power. Recruiting an ex-angel of his caliber wasn't just about numbers, it was about sending a message. The old order was breaking. The Mongols' rise in Australia had been accelerating for years. While other clubs fractured under police pressure, the Mongols thrived in the chaos. They expanded through Queensland, New South Wales, and Western Australia, absorbing smaller clubs and adopting outlaws who had been cast out by traditional giants like the Angels or the Rebels. For Dayne, joining them wasn't merely survival, it was evolution. The Mongols didn't demand silence or restraint. They thrived on noise, visibility, and dominance. Their ethos, respect few, fear none, matched the version of himself that refused to fade after his expulsion. Insiders in Perth's underworld whispered that Dayne's transition wasn't about revenge. It was about belonging to a brotherhood that still lived by the rules he believed in. The Mongols offered him what he'd lost: identity, camaraderie, and an enemy worth standing against. And for the club, his presence added legitimacy, a living emblem of what rebellion looked like when even the Angels couldn't contain it. By the time the story hit every major outlet, the transformation was complete. The man once seen as the heart of the Angels' Perth chapter now rode under a new flag. Tattoos unchanged, attitude unshaken, but allegiance rewritten. It wasn't just the turning of a page, it was a rewriting of outlaw mythology itself. The outlaw world took notice. Some called him fearless, others reckless. But either way, one truth became undeniable. Dayne Brajkovich had done what no one dared. He crossed the line and lived to tell the tale. Inside the Mongols' world, brotherhood, code, and conflict. If the Hells Angels are the aristocrats of the outlaw motorcycle world, the Mongols are its revolutionaries, born in the barrios of Southern California in the late 1960s. The club was created by men rejected by the Angels' Latino riders who wanted their own identity, their own power. That rejection forged their creed: never bow to anyone. Over half a century later, that same energy has fueled their global rise from Los Angeles to Europe, from New Zealand to Western Australia, and into that lineage rode Dayne Brajkovich. By the time he entered their orbit, the Mongols had already built a fearsome reputation in Australia. Police intelligence units described them as one of the fastest-growing outlaw motorcycle clubs in the country, known for their willingness to go toe-to-toe. Police surveillance intensified, raids multiplied, and rivalries reignited. Mongols' rapid expansion in Western Australia inevitably brought them into friction with other clubs, and the government's focus sharpened accordingly. Operation Ironfish, already targeting bikie networks, now had new fuel. The headlines were relentless. Ex-Angel joins Mongols. Outlaw reborn. Police target Perth's new power player. Dayne had stepped out of one fire and into another, this time willingly. Yet amid all the chaos, one thing stood out. He didn't hide. He walked the same streets, drove the same Harley, wore the same tattoos. To the public, he seemed untouched by fear or regret. Inside the club, he earned quiet respect for surviving what few could, an exile that would have broken most men. Among the Mongols, that kind of endurance is sacred. In many ways, Dayne's transformation mirrored the Mongols' own evolution, from outcast to powerhouse, from underdog to legend. Together, they represented the future of outlaw culture, no longer about secrecy. And for the first time in years, Dayne looked like a man who belonged again, not to the past, not to the angels, but to a new brotherhood forged in fire and defiance. War, watch lists, and Western Australia's crackdown. When Dayne Brajkovich crossed over to the Mongols, the move didn't just shake the underworld, it reignited the state's war on bikies. Western Australia had already declared open season on organised motorcycle clubs. The new anti-consorting laws, tattoo bans, and public order acts were designed to dismantle these organisations from the inside out. But the system wasn't built to handle defiance at this scale, and few men defied it as openly as Dayne. Within months of his transformation, police pressure intensified across Perth. The Gang Crime Squad and Operation Ironfish expanded their reach, targeting not only clubhouses, but also homes, vehicles, and financial networks. Every run, every public gathering, every photo on social media became evidence in the eyes of the state. The Mongols, already known for their refusal to bow to intimidation, pushed back with equal aggression, riding in visible formation, showing presence where others would go underground. It was a game of cat and mouse, where both sides refused to blink. Law enforcement viewed the Mongols' growth in Western Australia as an existential threat. Intelligence briefings described them as the most expansionist OMCG, outlaw motorcycle gang, in the nation. The inclusion of an ex-Hells Angel as recognizable as Brajkovich gave them both credibility and infamy. It also gave police a clear target, one man whose face represented an entire ideology of resistance. The state's message was clear. If they could break him, they could break the culture. Courtrooms became the new battlegrounds. Cameras caught Dayne walking through the Perth District Court, unflinching, as officers shadowed him from every angle. The government, led by WA Premier Mark McGowan at the time, doubled down on anti-bikie measures, citing Brajkovich's visibility as proof the laws were needed. His name appeared in press conferences, policy speeches, and legislative debates. The outlaw had become part of the political vocabulary. But the war wasn't just external. Within the outlaw community, tensions flared. The rebels, Comancheros, and remnants of the Angels all vied for dominance as the Mongols' numbers grew. Territorial lines blurred, and minor confrontations in pubs or tattoo shops often spiraled into headline-worthy chaos. Police raids frequently uncovered caches of weapons, drugs, and motorcycles stripped for parts, symbols of a culture refusing to fade despite legal extinction. And every time the Mongols appeared in public, so did Dayne, his face a reminder that the outlaw spirit couldn't be legislated out of existence. What made this era different was the strategy. Gone were the wild shootouts of the 1,990 seconds. The new war was fought through legislation, surveillance, and media. Drones replaced stakeouts. Financial audits replaced interrogations. It was a modern war, quiet, methodical, and relentless. And through it all, Brajkovich remained visible, stubbornly unbroken, walking the streets of Perth as though the new laws were just noise. To police, he was a symbol of defiance. To politicians, a headline that sold policy. To his brothers, a rallying point. And to the public, he was a paradox, part villain, part legend, part mirror, reflecting a society obsessed with control. The more the state tried to erase him, the more his image seemed to grow. And as Western Australia's crackdown deepened, so did the mythology around the man who refused to disappear. Reputation and redemption. Outlaws rarely get to choose their legacy. They live fast, burn bright, and vanish their stories told by others. But Dayne Brajkovich didn't vanish. He survived every chapter, the loyalty, the betrayal, the exile, the law, the ink, and came out the other side, not just alive, but transformed into something new. A public figure who never asked to be one. By 2024, his name wasn't just whispered in clubhouses or courtrooms anymore, it was trending. He'd become a strange kind of celebrity, half feared and half fascinated over. Every move he made was news, even when he wasn't trying to make headlines. Reporters called him a walking paradox, the outlaw who lived under surveillance yet acted freer than anyone. For many, he symbolized rebellion in its purest form, not the chaos of violence, but the audacity of being unapologetically himself in a world that demanded conformity. It's ironic, because Dayne never chased fame. His rise came through circumstance, the ink on his face, the club on his back, the laws written in his name. But somewhere along the line, the myth overtook the man. Every photograph became a statement. Every court appearance became theater. The same media that condemned him also kept his legend alive, turning his silence into a lure. In a world addicted to personalities, his stoicism became charisma. For the public, he became more than a biker. He was a test case, a living example of how far governments would go to control identity. Civil rights advocates questioned whether laws banning tattoos and symbols were a step too far. Social commentators debated whether the crackdown was justice or overreach. And through it all, Dayne never played victim. He just existed, quietly proving that visibility is its own form of power. The transformation wasn't just external. Those who've seen him in recent years describe a man less volatile, more reflective, still proud, still sharp, but not reckless. Gone are the days of drunken brawls or public outbursts. What remains is a strange maturity, the calm that comes after surviving every kind of storm. Maybe it's age, or maybe it's understanding that immortality doesn't come from fighting everyone, it comes from outlasting them. In Perth, where his story began, his reputation has shifted from menace to myth. Younger bikers speak his name with respect, not just for his past, but for his endurance. Even some critics admit he's one of the few who never folded. The system tried to silence him with exile, court orders, and legislation, but he remains a man whose tattoos became national conversation and whose silence became louder than 1,000 interviews. Now, when he walks through the city, there's still that same unbroken posture, head high, eyes steady. He doesn't hide from cameras anymore. He doesn't need to. Because after everything, Dayne Brajkovich no longer represents one club or one ideology. He represents survival, the rarest form of redemption an outlaw can find. The transformation from outlaw to symbol. Every outlaw story ends in one of three ways: prison, death, or disappearance. But Dayne Brajkovich broke the BAM pattern. He didn't die in a hail of bullets, didn't vanish into witness protection, didn't bow to the system. Instead, he did something far rarer. He evolved in plain sight. What began as the story of a young man from Perth who fell in love with speed, brotherhood, and rebellion became something larger, a portrait of transformation in a world built on loyalty and loss. For years, Dayne was defined by allegiance first to the Hells Angels, then, infamously, to the Mongols. His body told the story in ink, his life told it in choices. But as time passed, it became clear that his real transformation wasn't about switching clubs. It was about shedding the illusion that brotherhood required chains. He had once believed that identity was earned through patches, that loyalty meant obedience. What he learned painfully, publicly, was that freedom sometimes means walking away. The Dayne Brajkovich the world sees now isn't the same man who once stood on the steps of the Hells Angels clubhouse, tattoos fresh, fire in his eyes. The new version walks differently, still proud, but not performative. He's seen what loyalty costs when it turns into control. He's felt what exile feels like when silence replaces applause. And through that, he's found something purer, authenticity. In a culture obsessed with control by the state, by clubs, by public opinion, he became the one thing no one expected: his own man. There's a strange poetry in that. The system that tried to erase him accidentally turned him into a symbol. The laws written to suppress his kind ended up immortalizing him. The tattoos they wanted banned became conversation pieces in universities and parliament alike. What the police saw as defiance, the public began to interpret as resilience. And the man who once represented rebellion now represents endurance, the stubborn human instinct to stay visible even when the world demands you disappear. In interviews, he doesn't rant or romanticize. His words are measured, his tone calm. There's no bitterness when he talks about the angels, no bravado when he mentions the Mongols, just perspective. You learn who you are when everything gets taken away, he once said outside court. That sentence, simple as it sounds, captures the essence of his transformation. Beneath the layers of ink and notoriety lies something deeply human, the will to survive on your own terms.